Good afternoon, Marquette, and welcome to our latest campus town hall. I'm Dr. Xavier Cole, Vice President for Student Affairs here at Marquette, and I'll be moderating today's town hall in my capacity as chair of the university's COVID-19 response team. We've had a very good response to our COVID-19 town halls this summer with over 1,000 people joining virtually for each event. So we've decided to continue to offer the town halls to keep communication lines open with our community and to maintain transparency in our decision making. Today's town hall provide updates on how we're managing COVID-19 so far, as well as provide context on university economics and our vision moving forward. As we all work through the triple crises our country is facing right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, racial injustice, and our financial uncertainty. As your moderator for this campus town hall, I will do my very best to try to ensure as many questions get answered as possible. We received several questions in advance of today's town hall, and we'll also be responding quite a bit to the questions that you're asking via the chat, so please do use that function. Any questions related to COVID-19 that we do not have time to get to, we will share at the with the COVID-19 response leads so they can have their committees address them. We'll also be adding to our frequently asked questions on Marquette's coronavirus website, so please check there as well. Finally, this town hall is being recorded and will be posted to the COVID-19 page. And even before we get to Father Voice, I just wanted to say the community has been incredible. There's certainly been nothing more difficult than us trying to manage through this very uncertain and fluid crisis. But at every turn, our faculty, staff, administration, and students have stepped up to do very difficult things, master new processes, and have been flexible and gracious with each other every day as we learn, as we deal with this pandemic. I just wanted to thank you for that grace that you have provided. And I particularly, from my shop in Student Affairs, want to put a shout out to our Res Life and dining team, and Rick Arcuri's group and Mary Jans's group, and also to Kelly Walmer and the medical team. Those jobs have been taken to another level to respond to this pandemic. We have incredible professionals working in all these areas to care for our community members, and I just want to throw that special thank you out to those folks. You're appreciated. So now that we've covered our housekeeping, I want to introduce Father Jim Voice, VP for Mission and Ministry, who will offer an invocation before we get started, and then we'll hear from President Lovell. So now if we please quiet ourselves for Father Jim Voice.
Good afternoon. Let's just take a moment of quiet, bring our cares and concerns before the Lord as we gather for today's meeting. Loving God, source of life and of wisdom, we are coming together at a difficult time. Even before Schrader Hall's quarantine is complete, the surge of infections in Cobein reminds us how vulnerable we are. Not only our personal health, but also the details of Marquette's future are uncertain. We have hard decisions to make. What we choose and how we come to those decisions will leave their mark both on the Marquette of the future and on each of us. Help us as we face this anxious time. Protect us from fear, anger, and suspicion. Pour forth on us the gift of Ignatian indifference, privileging your greater good above our own personal interests. Guide us with your Spirit, so that we may discern well our next steps and find our way to your vision and hopes for our future. We make this prayer in your most holy name. Amen. And now it's my privilege to turn the microphone over to Dr. Lovell.
Mike, your mic's off. Sorry about that. Thank you, Father Voice, and I'm going to welcome all of you to today's conversation. I want to start my remarks with an apology for holding today's virtual town hall on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year in Judaism. And for our Jewish campus community members, I'm sorry that this important Marquette conversation was scheduled on your Day of Atonement. I would also be remiss if I did not acknowledge to members of our campus community that we had another strong rankings in U.S. News and World Report. I was particularly proud of Marquette being ranked 18th best university in the country for undergraduate teaching, which was an amazing improvement of 54 spots from last year. This ranking is a tribute to the commitment that our faculty and staff have to serving our students and providing them with a transformational education. I am likewise proud of Marquette being ranked the 42nd most innovative university in the country. This is the first time in our history that we made the innovation rankings. I would acknowledge the incredible work of Jean Hassemlop and so many faculty and staff on our campus who put Marquette on the leading edge of education, research, and service. Now, as we reflect on the near and long-term future of Marquette, it's important to face the reality that there are many steep challenges in front of us. The pandemic, the demographic shifts, the economic pressures, and the racial justice crisis are all hitting us at the same time. To put it bluntly, the path ahead of us is very difficult, and there are no easy answers. The forces working against us have put Marquette, like most universities in our country, at an inflection point in our history. As we work to overcome these challenges, we have a dual imperative. The first is to create a more sustainable financial model for our university. The second is to preserve the integrity and quality of a transformational Marquette education. We face these imperatives with an additional pressure of a rapidly changing higher ed landscape and the need to care for the safety and well-being of our campus community. Amid so much uncertainty, there are two things that I ask each of you. First, guard against living in fear of the future. Creativity and innovation are stifled by fear. We need everyone in our community to be courageous and bold and to help generate ideas that will ensure our future success. Second, we need everyone to put their own self-interest aside and to focus on the future of the university. Marquette has a rich 139-year-old history, and we have never faced so many daunting challenges at one time. Utilizing the present situation to promote any agenda other than preserving the long-term health of the university will only put our university at a greater risk. We must unify our efforts, work together, and give up our own personal agendas for the greater good. We need to remember that all of us have been entrusted with caring for a university that's 139 years old. We have a responsibility that Marquette is here for another 139 years. That means we need to not only focus on this semester and academic year, but we need to look out 5, 10, and 20 years into Marquette's future. Ensuring the long-term success of Marquette will require us to make significant structural changes to the university this year. It is likely that Marquette will change more over the next year than any time since 1909, the year that Marquette became the first Catholic university in the world to enroll women with men. We will need to take similar bold actions this year to ensure that Marquette will continue to live out its mission and vision. Making structural changes for any organization is hard. It requires undertaking a comprehensive review of all areas of an institution. As you will hear in today's town hall, this review process has begun at Marquette and will continue and will ultimately end with our campus making difficult decisions about our future. We all need to remember that the end goal is to ensure that our university is best positioned to thrive and attract future generations of outstanding students, faculty, and staff. As you will hear later, we know the university's reduction goals. We divided the reductions across Chemo, Joel, and my areas, which include every unit on campus. In conjunction with Chemo and Joel, I believe these allocations are fair and equitable when considering how to best fulfill Marquette's mission. Going forward this year, we will need to define the specific structural changes that will be made for the different units on campus. You have my commitment that any changes that are made will be done thoughtfully and with the sole intention of setting Marquette up for future success. No matter what changes are made, we will always preserve our focus on transforming our students. We will also remain committed to performing research and serving our community. As we consider both research and service, we know that we will have to take a more focused approach. This means that we need to identify specific clusters of interdisciplinary excellence that engage students, faculty, and staff to solve our communities and world's most pressing problems. The task ahead of us will be difficult, but we are committed to being transparent. And in this regard, you will learn more about various work groups today that have been gathering data and making initial framework decisions. You will also learn about how we will involve existing structures, including the academic and staff senates, in the discernment process that will lead to us making meaningful decisions. Finally, I would like to close by saying that you should never lose sight of the amazing people that we have within our community. If we work together, I know that we can make Marquette even stronger in the years ahead. I thank you again for being here, and I ask Dr. Cole to continue with our program.
Thank you, President Lovell. Next, we'd like to hear from Kelly Walmer, Director of our Marquette University Medical Center, who will provide an update on our current health and safety procedures. Kelly?
Thank you, Xavier. I know fresh on all of our minds is the Cobein Quarantine, and I thought I would go ahead and address that first. As you're aware, Cobein Hall residents were put in a 14-day quarantine effective at 11 p.m. on Friday, September 25th. We have received many questions regarding thresholds of number of cases or percentage of positive cases within a dorm that would prompt us to quarantine. I thought I would try to explain those strategies and reasonings here for you and then go over the specifics for Cobein. The percentage of cases or total number of cases in a particular residence hall is not the trigger for quarantine. Some houses are housing less than 100 students while others house close to 400. And you can imagine a percentage of varying size population isn't quite as meaningful as one would like. For example, 3% of 100 is 3, while 3% of 400 is 12. It's the transmission rate between close contacts and in what amount of time that transmission occurs that is important. It's important to see how many cases are identified in a short period of time and show a relationship to each other. This is identified through contact tracing. We look for direct correlation and evidence of transmission among groups. This is how the virus is seeded, and then it can quickly spread across a defined population. In Cobein Hall, through contact tracing, we identified 2 distinct clusters of cases that were identified over a 5-day period of time. This prompted the surveillance testing that we did on September 25th. Initially, our 2 clusters contained a total of 9 cases. However, when we did the surveillance testing and did additional contact tracing, we found additional cases that were linked to those clusters, totaling 9 in one cluster and 7 in the second. Within a short 6-day period of time, we had 2 distinct clusters totaling 17 cases amongst a defined group of students. This is what prompted the quarantine. For informational purposes, I did calculate the percent positivity rate overall in the residence hall and currently was 6.4% positivity rate. With that, I'd like to switch gears and show the dashboard. Danny, if you could pull that up, I think you have it, thank you. Our dashboard has been updated to show new information, including 7-day average of new cases and daily and 7-day average of percent positive cases. Currently, the dashboard is showing our cumulative cases since August 21st. As you can see, a total of 195 cases have been present since that time. 10 were among faculty and staff, and 185 were among students. The graph below shows the number of new Marquette COVID-19 cases per day. We show on a daily basis the number of students as well as faculty and staff. Danny, if you could hover over on the 25th there, we can see that on the 25th of September, we had 24 reported cases. All 24 were students, none were faculty or staff. So we can hover over each day to see the various number of cases on a given day. You will note that seemingly we have larger numbers on some days and quite small on others. And this has to do with the way that our results are reported, which I will cover later down in the dashboard. I did want to point out here, though, also the 7-day average, which is the gray line. And as you hover over it, you can see. So currently our 7-day average is 10 new reported cases. We can go ahead and scroll down, Danny, to the number of COVID test results per day. This table or graph does show our number of positive tests, our number of negative tests, and then gives us our % positives. The blue lines you can see are quite erratic, and this is a day-to-day positivity rate. Day-to-day doesn't matter as much as the trend or the % positive daily over, % positive over a 7-day time frame. And you can see that our averages have been running on the 26th there, you see at 15%. And today it has, the daily rate was only 2%, but again, you can see we had 2 positive tests out of 118. If we look at the % positive on the daily average, we currently are running at 12%. Deanna, you can go ahead and scroll down to the gating criteria. I should note that the above numbers are updated every day at 2 p.m., whereas the gating criteria is just updated once per week on Fridays at 2 p.m. These are our gating criteria that were established to help us to determine when we may need to pivot to other strategies. The first is the test result timing definition. This measures how long it takes for us to get the result back from a lab. Our goal is always less than 48 hours. Sometimes we do see 48 to 72 hours. Our current gate is green because we are averaging less than 48 hours. The reason this is important is the sooner we have the results, the sooner that we can isolate positive individuals and contact trace and quarantine their close contacts. The second gate is the % positivity that we just discussed above. This is our only gate currently that is in the red. And the reason it is in the red is because our 7-day average is higher than 10%. And as I stated above, it is currently at 12%. The next gate is the space gate, and this is in reference to our availability of quarantine and isolation spaces on campus. As you're aware, we do have quarantine spaces and isolation spaces set aside for our students that need them. Our isolation spaces are in some of our residence halls, but these are isolation spaces where individuals would have their own room and their own bathroom so they can be appropriately isolated. We are currently in the green for both quarantine and isolation. The next gate is personal protective equipment for our healthcare providers on campus. Our gate is green. We currently have a greater than 45-day supply of all pertinent materials, including things like masks, gloves, and gowns. And the final gate is our tracing gate. This gate measures the amount of time it takes from the time where a result is reported to us by the lab as positive. It's the amount of time from that notification until we reach the person who is positive, so we may begin contact tracing. Please note that this gate measures only those results that are received from our on-campus lab. However, we still do contact tracing for those individuals that self-disclose to us so that we may also identify close contacts in quarantine as needed. Danny, we're done with the dashboard. Thank you very much. One thing I did want to say is that the elevated metrics would require us to evaluate and potentially change course of action. And much like the city, there's no one metric or combination of metrics that would necessitate one specific action. I did want to briefly also review our testing strategy as we continue to get questions about it. Our testing strategy continues to focus on the need to provide efficient and reliable testing on site so that we may isolate infected individuals and quarantine their close contacts to decrease transmission. Our priority remains to test our symptomatic students and those who have been exposed to an individual who has tested positive. Close contacts include students, faculty, and staff, and all can be tested on campus. The strategy is supported by our university medical team, our board member medical experts, and local community experts. While surveillance testing is not routinely performed, there are times when we will need to test certain populations to understand the prevalence of infection or prevent spread. This was recently implemented in the Schrader Hall as well as Cobein Hall situations due to identified clusters. Currently, we do not recommend mass surveillance testing of all students and faculty or staff, remembering that mass testing just gives us a measure of incidence at a certain point in time, but one status can change quickly within hours to days. Mass testing is not realistic and is not supported. Our current state and national testing supply shortages continue to present a challenge to testing, not only on our campus, but state and nationally. We've noted this recently with our own on-campus testing through Hologic, and now we're unable to get further reagents. Fortunately, we do have reference labs, including Quest Diagnostics, Wisconsin Diagnostic Labs, and the City Lab, which continue to support our testing on campus. Students access testing through calling the medical clinic for screening and to make an appointment. There is no charge for testing on campus. Faculty and staff that have been identified as close contacts of positive cases may also be tested on campus at no charge. And a reminder, our faculty and staff do have access to free testing through the UMR insurance plan. Please see our website for further details regarding testing at Marquette University. Xavier, to you.
Thank you, Kelly. And what I'll do is I see a question that is particularly germane to what you've just talked about. I'll go ahead and ask you that question, and that it'd be good for the entire town hall to hear. And so, Kelly, a quick question for you is from Amber, is it Wachowski? And she asks, do we have any evidence of classroom transmission? I mean, we both know that we have evidence of residence hall transmission that we've isolated and quarantined, but do we have evidence of classroom transmission as of yet?
Fortunately, we do not have any evidence of classroom transmission. This is due to our strict policies of our masking policy, as well as our social distancing within the classroom. We do effective contact tracing and have not identified any direct transmission in a classroom.
And I promise the last follow-up before I go to Mary. This is just, I think, a clarity for the community. Do these positive cases also include graduate students and part-time graduate students?
Yes, anyone who is tested on campus or self-discloses, whether it be faculty, staff, or student, are included in our testing numbers and our case number.
Yes, that was from David Wangro. All right, excellent. You guys have been doing a great job, Kelly, and we're really, really grateful for the work that you all do 7 days a week as of late, same with Res Life. And with that, we're going to transition to Mary Jans, who's our Executive Director of Residence Life, who will give us an update on our quarantine and isolation processes, what's recently happened in Schrader Hall, and what is currently happening in Cobein Hall. Mary?
Thank you, Xavier. Good afternoon. My name is Mary Jans, and I serve as the Executive Director of Housing and Residence Life for our campus. I'd like to begin with providing some information regarding the Cobein Quarantine situation. As Kelly mentioned, based on the surveillance testing and what we were seeing in Cobein Hall, we determined, along with the Milwaukee Health Department, that it to be in the best interest of our students and our campus to quarantine the hall until Saturday, October 10th. I understand that this is hard for the students who remain in Cobein Hall. We will do our best to replicate what we provided for Schrader Hall and utilize what we learned from the first quarantine. Many of our students living in Cobein went home to quarantine, and they will be asked to provide proof of testing prior to their return. I did see before jumping on to this portion that there is a question about that testing. Kelly, that might be a good one for you later. I'd like to provide a recap of the Schrader Hall quarantine process. We did our very best to provide and care for the Schrader residents during their quarantine period. We were able to define outdoor space where students could socially distance and take advantage of last week's beautiful weather. In addition to outdoor time, President Lovell and Provost Ayoun walked through the building during the first weekend of quarantining to hand out snacks to the students staying on campus. Rec Sports provided a high-intensity exercise class, and Residence Life provided a yoga instructor. On Friday night, RHA provided a Glow Bingo event where President Lovell again stopped by to join in the fun. They offered great prizes where many in attendance left with a prize in hand. On Saturday, our dining partner, Sodexo, provided a picnic of smoked salmon, smoked turkey, Polish sausages, grilled corn on the cob, Parmesan potatoes, and peach cobbler, which was fantastic for all of our students staying in Schrader. Again, President Lovell, Provost Ayoun, and Professor Mike Dandrin joined me to serve the students their lunch. The pep band played with a guest performer, Dr. Xavier Cole. Many of the students remained outside for the full lunch period. I want to thank the students for their cooperation during these past 14 days, and I want to thank the staff of Schrader Hall who stayed on to assist students, check in on our students, and provide opportunities during this time frame. I want to thank other partners who continue to work with us during these challenging times. Our counseling center has provided a list of telemental health opportunities. Our home ministers were engaged in connecting with students, along with a host of faculty and staff who checked in with our students in quarantine, whether they were here on campus or at home. Finally, I want to thank MUPD, who provided us with resources as it relates to our security and staffing our front desk. Schrader Hall's quarantine period ends tonight at 10 p.m. Students who left campus to quarantine must provide proof of a negative COVID test before they're allowed to return. The deadline to provide these results was today at noon, though I continue to check that email address to ensure that any that come in before I leave this evening will be recorded. Returning students must check in at the Schrader Hall check-in station before going to class or continuing with any other campus business tomorrow. If they have not yet provided or do not bring proof of their test, they will not be allowed to re-enter or to return to class. As Kelly mentioned, we are seeing some cases in other halls and cases in the near campus community. We are meeting with local landlords and property managers to partner with them in trying to ensure that students are making wise choices as it relates to gatherings without cloth face coverings. If I might make a final plea to all on campus to please follow the COVID policies. Wear your face covering even if you go to your friend's room. Wear your face covering even if your friend comes into your room. And finally, please be cognizant of social distancing. Whether you're outside or inside, it makes a difference. This is how we are going to stop the spread of the virus. Thank you. Xavier, I'll turn it back over to you now.
Thank you so much, Mary. And Mary, as I look in the chat and questions, Sumata Chattopadhyay was referencing a story that was out on CBS 58, talking about some of the Cobein students who returned home. This was also a phenomenon we saw with Schrader students. We had approximately 101 Schrader students go home to their places of permanent residence when we announced a quarantine. The university was very clear that we wanted and intended for those students to stay where they were for not only their safety, but the safety of their community and the communities to which they were returning. In the end, the university cannot stop a student from leaving, particularly if their parents are supporting them leaving, in some cases coming to get them, in some cases and encouraging. And so, but we do what we can to put out the warnings, and we certainly put clear guidelines in place about how that student can return. And if those guidelines aren't met, they are not returning back into the community. I know that creates difficulties. It was truly not something that we anticipated would happen. But the human behavioral aspect of this COVID response is one that continues to be mercurial and extremely fluid. We'll continue to repeat our guidance. We will be clear and consistent with it, and we'll certainly hold our students accountable. We were able to track down some students who said they had left a permanent residence but did not. We were able to find them and get those students either into our quarantine or in their permanent residence. That was from a couple of weeks ago. So just know that it is something that we are following up on, Sumana, and we are also concerned. And the thing that I'll mention before I shift to Dr. John Su is that we also have new news with our child care center from Marquette that there are 0 cases of COVID with the children and 0 cases with the staff. What does this tell you? It tells you to look to the actions of children and how they are following the guidelines about wearing their mask, washing their hands, social distancing. It works. This is not brain surgery. So we need a behavioral shift, and we need the entire community to support this shift and challenging appropriately and civilly those that we see not adhering to these guidelines. That's what it's going to take. It is not impossible. It does take discipline, and it does take consistency. So thank you, Sumana, for that, and know that we share your concerns. And now I turn this to the Venerable Dr. John Su.
Xavier, did you say the vulnerable John Su? Good to see you.
both and, John.
Thank you. Faculty, students, staff, community members, it's wonderful to see you again. I was just meditating this morning, thinking, I can't wait till we can do this in person. And in the meantime, thank you to everyone who's putting your questions in the chat box, your input in the chat box. Any good planning process depends on your input, your expertise. I want to think for a moment particularly about our students from whom I'm always learning. And I'm also just like to draw attention to our amazing non-tenure track faculty, who in so many cases are teaching our first and second year students. Thank you. Thank you for your guidance for how we continue to move forward. I've only got 7 minutes left. I have 3 major announcements, so I apologize for my auctioneer's voice that I may start assuming, but at any time, please feel free to follow up with me. The 3 sets of announcements are: 1, around the status for spring 2021 course scheduling; 2, spring 2021 academic calendar; and 3, the instructor-facing academic experience survey. First item, spring 2021 scheduling. I'm happy to say we are on schedule to have the October 19th public release of this course schedule and registration beginning on November 9th. We're in a much better situation than we were for fall in that we're not having to retrofit a schedule in which students had already signed up. We've looked to faculty, department chairs, colleges on the course scheduling side to identify which courses are best suited for which modality, recognizing that some courses are not well suited to be online and some are particularly pedagogically well suited for that format. On the demand side, we've been utilizing the academic experience survey information from you students, so thank you. We've also been looking to your college level advisors to guide us in terms of what are the most likely courses, the highest priority courses by modality to maximize the chances for your academic progress. So the key thing to keep in mind on this first update is students, please, 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 as we get closer to the advising week, reach out to your advisor proactively. Start to think about what does the modality you're looking for, what is that? What is the schedule you're looking for? Let's get that process started right away so that we can make the adjustments as we are able. Second announcement, the spring 2021 academic calendar. What we've begun to observe over the past month across the country is more and more institutions are canceling their spring break. They're canceling their spring break out of concern for the potential for transmission as students go to other locations, and then that return increased transmission to the campus community. The question is what's right for Marquette? At the direction of President Lovell and Provost Ayun, we've started a process over the last week and now this week of gathering inputs. There are 3 primary kinds of options, each of which has its benefits and drawbacks. We have the retain the current academic calendar, we have shortened the combined spring break, Easter break, and then either start a week late or end a week early, or we would again reduce the combined spring break, Easter break, but add a 1 day off per month option. In terms of the strengths and weaknesses of each of those three quickly, option one, the strength is we know everyone's been changing everything all the time. And for those of you who've already tried to lock down plans, it's nice to have that certainty. The disadvantage, as I said, there's genuine concern about the potential for increased transmission. Option two has the challenge, or well, excuse me, the positive is we effectively eliminate breaks that allow for significant travel. The challenge is just that. What does the mental health and well-being of our campus community look like in that circumstance? It also has the additional complexity that per federal financial aid guidelines, if we ever shift the academic calendar start or end dates, we need to reissue student loans. And so there's a logistical challenge with option two. Option three, the benefit again is it limits long-term travel, but by giving a day off each month, there's still the potential for certain kinds of travel that will logically occur. So what do we do next? We'll be meeting with the deans, academic planning group, with Senate, MUSG, GSO, the department chairs, and others this week. Students, please reach out to your MUSG rep. Faculty and staff, reach out to your department chairs or equivalent or dean. Let us know which of these three options makes the most sense to you. And if any of you don't know who's your rep, please just email me directly, john.sue@marquette.edu. Here again, this is another moment where our wisdom together will help to guide us. And our goal is to have a final determination of whatever spring calendar will be no later than October 19th to ensure there'll be no disruption in the course registration process. Finally, our third announcement update for you, which is just around the instructor-facing academic experience survey. As you all remember, we're really depending and looking to you all 5 times this semester for students, twice for instructors, to get a better sense of what can we do to address challenges as they emerge, as they evolve and mutate over the semester. We've already begun to act on the first round of the student-facing academic survey, and the second student survey is going out today. So students, we had a great response rate. I think 22% was the number that was sticking in my head for the first one. Please keep giving us that information. We're particularly interested to see how attitudes change over the semester. That will give us the guidance to know what changes we need to do to ensure your exceptional academic experience in a pandemic. We're now in the instructor side. We've gotten the first one back and we're processing that here again this week. We began that process with the deans this morning. We'll be processing with the academic planning group tomorrow, the department chairs Wednesday, the University Academic Senate's Executive Committee Wednesday as well. We recognize that this requires an institution-wide response. So what do we know with about a minute left of my time? Couple key highlights. Good news. Digital equity has improved relative to spring 2020. On the student side, we observed that 94% of students indicate that they have the necessary technology to succeed. That still leaves us with 6%, and I'm grateful to Laurie Panella, Danny Smith, and our friends in ITS for their work to try and get laptops, get hotspots to those students who are still experiencing difficulties with that technology access. We know the foundation of the educational experience depends on this. Not such good news. Learning challenges. We have 63% of students saying they're having difficulty concentrating. 62% of students say they're challenged with collaborating, interacting with other students. This is particularly something we take seriously because, as you all know, year after year, Marquette students say on the National Survey of Student Engagement that they report higher levels of collaborative learning with students and with faculty. To that end, we've already engaged, and thanks to the great work of Jennifer Maney, Mari Parras-Toral, and others in the CTL and Division of Digital Learning, to ensure that our trainings and workshops this semester for faculty are specifically addressing this kind of engagement issue. The final piece of the I'd like to draw everyone's attention to with my last moment is workload and isolation. On both the student and instructor side, we see this. 76% of students and 79% of instructors indicate they feel isolated from their peers at Marquette. We know this is a national challenge, but we need to do everything we can. Xavier, if I can embarrass you in public for just a moment, I heard Xavier say something really impressive to the response team last week when he said, every one of us needs to ask the question, do we need to seek out those resources that will help us? And I know we have a social stigma about addressing these issues, but students, if there are challenges you're facing, please seek out the resources from our counseling center. Faculty, staff, if you're experiencing challenges, please reach out to the Employee Assistance Program, and we all together can continue proactively and reactively to work together to ensure our experience of a campus community as we move forward over these next 9 weeks together. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Sue. And I always appreciate your words and encouragement. And so I'll actually double down and just be very direct. For faculty and staff who are experiencing unique stresses from this pandemic, the workload, the mixture of the work and childcare, elder care, all these things that impact us as human beings, please reach out to EAP to take advantage of those services. For our students, please reach out to our counseling center to schedule an appointment if you're experiencing the stresses, worrying about COVID, worrying about quarantine, all these things. Please reach out for help. And for our entire community, we need to continue to provide each other as much grace as possible through these stressful times. When we're stressed, we tend to be short with others and we tend to be very frustrated quickly. That does not help to solve our problems as a community, so please continue to provide grace. And thank you, Dr. Sue, for all the work that you and your team are doing to support our faculty and to support our students' learning in the classroom. And just for later, once we get to the open Q&A, there's a big question out there that I want all of us to be thinking about. And Teresa Wagner asks this question: what's the likelihood of going all online? And what would be the push factors to move all classes online? That's a big question. We'll save it to that section. I think we'll all have an opportunity to chime in. Thank you, Dr. Sue. Next, we'll hear from Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer Joel Pogadzinski regarding our university economic situation. Joel.
Thank you, Xavier. I'm Joel Pogadzinski. I'm our Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, and I'm going to join you this afternoon to give you an update on our economic landscape. Next slide, please. So I want to start with taking a brief step back before I update you on how we are looking going forward. So this is what we shared in early this summer. And I just wanted to remind everybody to give us a bit of a baseline for our discussion on what we've learned since then and how we're looking at our economic landscape going forward. So at that time, we had talked about known risks for this year, FY21, in the range of $20 to $25 million. And those risks were attributable to a smaller incoming class than we anticipated. I'll get to details later, but we have an incoming class of around 1,650 students. Increased level of financial aid with the smaller student classes across higher ed nationally and the more competitive landscape. There was a need to offer increased financial aid to attract and retain students. And then lastly, our recovery costs, everything from our dining halls to our cleaning to our physical distancing, and the list goes on, had an expense associated with those. So we knew entering this year that we'd have in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 million, and we had a list of things that were really unknown at that time, including what would happen over the summer with retention, what would happen in our residence halls, events, and the remainder of operating costs that would happen throughout the year. So that's where we were several months ago, and in this day and age, several months is a lot of time. Things change week to week and sometimes day to day. So let's go to the next slide and talk about an update on where we are from there. So What we did in response to those $20 to $25 million of risks was took mitigating actions in place. And I would characterize these as temporary actions, meaning COVID came upon us very quickly. We knew the economic impact to us was significant in a short amount of time. And it would take us some time to develop the strategic responses that we would need to address our economic gaps for the long term, which I'll address in a moment. But the mitigating actions that we took for this year were as follows. We suspended our FY21 merit increase program that was normally effective July 1st. We implemented discretionary spending reductions across the university, across all areas and all units. We suspended our 403B retirement employer match, the 8% opportunity to match your retirement program. And lastly, we instituted leadership temporary pay reductions, whereby the University Leadership Council and the men's and women's basketball coach all took 5% pay reductions, and Dr. Lovell, the provost, Dr. Ayun, and myself took 10% pay reductions. So again, these mitigating actions were temporary in nature. They were meant to fill a gap, for lack of a better word, of an immediate economic gap that we had this year. So let's go to the next slide and talk about what we've learned since then. So again, the reminder of our previously known risks from $20 to $25 million. There are likely several updated challenges that we're facing for this year. The first of which, when we went through our plan to bring back students to campus and operate in a residential environment, to gain both the approval of the health department and our board of directors, and also to provide our students and families with the most comprehensive options that are best for them, either economically or for their health and safety. We offered a residency opt-out programs, either due to their modality of education because their courses were all online, or in the case of sophomores, the opportunity to move out of their residency requirements in our residence halls. As a result of those programs, approximately 700 students opted out of our residency requirements. And while that was a known program going in and a requirement for us to open in-person education this fall, that amounted to over 20% of our room and board, and that will have about a $7.5 million additional impact on our fiscal year in FY21. Secondly, as we approach October, there's an increased likelihood that as we approach basketball season, that there will be less fans and less ticket sales for our basketball season this year. And that's just a result of us scenario planning. These things change from week to week and month to month, and there's no specific news on that front, but certainly we're expecting and we're planning for a lower likelihood of revenue coming from this season. So our current outlook for FY21, despite the fact that we've taken $20+ million of actions already in place for this year, we are anticipating that our university gap could grow and exceed an additional $10 million. This is fluid. Those are things that are changing over the course of the year. We're about 3 months into the fiscal year, but I think it's safe for us to say that we are expecting that additional mitigating actions will be likely this year in order for us to address a growing gap in FY21. Next slide, please. So with respect to FY21, we are still scenario planning. In a normal year, when we're 3 months in, we're past the census, and we have a certain amount of clarity as to what the fiscal year is going to look like. This year is very different. Our range of outcomes, even though we're a quarter of the way into the year, are still fairly wide. We know that the COVID gating process that Dr. Woolmer took us through is a very important process of how we operate going forward. So we need to continue to monitor that in the event that we need to pivot. We certainly have had 2 pivots already where we've had to quarantine 2 residence halls. We don't know what other pivots might be coming our way this year, but those could expand and include moving to remote at some point. Certainly I've talked about basketball season, and we don't fully know the impact on philanthropy for this year. There is still a scenario, and I saw this question in chat, where it's possible at some point we could find ourselves in a position that we would have to operate in a way that we did this spring, where we would have to academically shift our modality to fully online and have a remote campus. If that were to happen at some point, that could come quickly, and we'll react accordingly. And we have all the confidence in the world that we can do that in our faculty and staff if needed. But we are also still fighting as a university, as a faculty and staff, and as a leadership team to provide that in-person experience that we are seeking to do. But we'll be ready in the case that happens. If that does happen, the impact is significant on us economically, and there certainly would be additional actions. And we might find ourselves in a position whereby the university would have to use cash reserves and debt to bridge a short-term window if that were to happen. So just to summarize in FY21, the gap that we experienced and that we saw going into the year is a bit bigger. We will likely have some additional actions, and we continue to monitor over the course of the year. The range of outcomes remain wide. So while that can be a bit unsettling, it is for all of us. What we can commit to you is that we'll continue to communicate, whether it's in additional town halls, academic and staff senates, small group discussions at coffees and so forth, and faculty groups and the like. There will be numerous amounts of communication as we proceed over the course of this semester. Next slide, please. So what we really need to spend some time on is pivoting forward and looking at FY22 and beyond. We talked a bit about the fact that in this year, in FY21, we have a series of temporary actions that we're taking. But we know as additional cohorts come into place that the outlook for us and the potential ranges of exposure for the university can grow. So what this slide does is for next year illustrates what our potential impact is for us for next fiscal year. There's really a couple of key areas, and mostly in the areas of enrollment and tuition. So when we approved our budget last December, the outlook for FY22 was similar to what we had experienced in the previous 2 years. We had a record class not too long ago, and we had a class near 2,000 last year. We had goals to be slightly north of 2,000 students. We know that this year's current freshman class is around 1,650, and we're modeling a class in the neighborhood of 1,770 for next year. And of course, more time will tell us where that will actually land. That impact on us for next fiscal year will be approximately $25 million in net tuition and room and board. At the same time, a number of you probably have seen that we made an announcement last week after we received approval from our Board of Trustees that we instituted a flat tuition or no tuition increase for next academic year for both our incoming students and our returning students. At the same time, we know that this year we're experiencing increased financial aid demands that carry forward through us for multiple years as the cohorts work through. So we think that's absolutely the right decision to make economically. People are challenged, whether it's COVID or other economic conditions, and the university is making the decision to ensure that we have the highest degree of access to Marquette's Catholic Jesuit education, and doing what we need to do to control our costs to provide that mission going forward. So we will have no tuition increase next year, but that impact for us will be about $17.5 million between tuition and financial aid. Along with immediate use fundraising dollars, we're anticipating about a $45 million gap and possibly higher as we enter next fiscal year. So you can see that that number is roughly twice the amount that we are experiencing this year. Next slide, please. So I want to give a picture of looking forward and what potential actions we are looking at for not only this year, but the years ahead. So I just want to orient you to this slide as there's a number of numbers to absorb. But I will say the first column shows our FY21 and our $25 million plus financial gap. And there you see some of those measures that I talked about earlier that are mostly temporary in nature: the 403B suspension, the leadership wage reductions, the suspension of the merit program, and the discretionary spending reductions. Those are all the actions that we took this fiscal year. When you look one column over into FY22, as that financial gap grows to 45 million plus, there are a number of things that we need to grapple with on a more permanent basis. First off, we want to say that the actions that we are taking this year are not actions that we want to have place as our strategy to address our long-term challenges. We certainly don't want for the long term, for example, to have pay reductions and retirement match suspensions to be our strategy. So you can see that our intent is for those temporary actions to be reinstated as we move forward, and we move to more permanent structural and strategic changes. And that's how we're spending this fiscal year to be prepared to have those in place for next year. So you can see next year that we will probably have a number of actions that will, again, be strategic and structural in nature that will, in combination, help us deal with the $45 million challenge that we have. First, I should say that our merit suspension that we had this year, effective July 1st, there is potential that we may again hold our merit increase program for another year, effective July 1 for next fiscal year. That's a possibility for us, although no final decisions have been made. But that would mean that the economic impact of that would grow from $4 to $5 million to about $9 million. We certainly see that as multiple cohorts have come in at lower enrollment levels, that we'll have to curtail our discretionary spending accordingly. So we also know that our spend reductions will be in place next year as a university across all units. And we think that those spend reductions might be in the order of magnitude of $11 million or so. And you can see as that third and fourth cohort come in, some of these numbers continue to grow, although not at the same pace. But lastly, I should say that at this point, we are expecting, with the lower enrollment levels and lower tuition, and to be good stewards of the resources that we have, it's incumbent upon us as a leadership team and faculty and staff to right size our spend to align with the revenues that we are generating as a university. And that means that we're looking not only at our compensation and benefits and what we do from a discretionary spend perspective, but it also means that we have to align our faculty and staff levels to match our revenues and our enrollment levels. So at this point, even though we have a multifaceted plan, we are expecting that we would have in the neighborhood of 225 to 300 plus faculty and staff reductions in the short term, starting with this fiscal year before we reach FY22. And as a part of our strategy, this isn't a simple reduction in force event. We don't want to ask the university to do the same things with less people. We think it's very important that we identify who Marquette is on the other side. And we want to identify our strengths and focus on our mission, and also at the same time accentuate those, but potentially rationalize and reduce things that are either underutilized or not core to what we feel is our strengths going forward. And that will result in faculty and staff reductions this year. I do want to proactively address one item. There was an incoming question relative to headcount reductions. There is a discussion around 450 people. I just shared with you the levels of headcount reductions that we're expecting this year, which is less than that. I think the context for those who are interested, if we have a $45 million gap, and if you look at the average compensation and benefit cost of our individual faculty and staff, that would imply, if we were solely looking at headcount, of 450 people. But you can see here that we're looking at a multifaceted strategy that looks at comp and benefits, discretionary spend reductions as well, in addition to headcount. So we don't expect headcount reductions at that level, but certainly meaningful levels as we go forward. And how we are addressing those is really through our university work streams. And I want to pivot to that on the next slide, please. So we've created work streams across the university to create a path for strategic, structural, long-term change. And here you see a list of those work streams and who is responsible for those on the university. And you can see that these work streams impact all of our workforce, our work resources. So of course, the academic planning group, which Dr. Ayun will touch on in his presentation next, is a very important one because it's at the core of what we do. That's led by Dr. Woods. And we have a number of other ones, including the non-academic, non-core pieces. We're going to look at our campus space. That's certainly one of our major resources. And how do we go ahead and align the space that we're utilizing with our enrollment levels as well? Similar concept. Certainly all areas of the university are impacted by this, and athletics is no exception. They are part of the work streams that we're looking at to make sure that we have the right strategies going forward and the right level of investment in the proper areas. And we'll look at employee benefits. Claudia Page, our VP of Human Resources, is looking at that, and we're entering the open enrollment period coming up, so we'll have more information on that as we move forward. Certainly, I've talked about our discretionary spend as a university. We want to make sure we right-size our spending and make sure that the spending that we do is impactful and curtail the less critical spend that we have. And lastly, outside of those, we certainly are looking at our administrative organization, so our staff outside of academic affairs. And Claudia Page is leading that, and certainly Dr. Lovell and myself are very close to looking at our staffing and our organizational side outside of academic affairs as well. So that concludes my presentation on economic landscape. We certainly are in a changing environment and a very impactful in terms of numbers. We'll continue to communicate with you over the course of the coming months as this evolves and share and partner with campus to come up with our solutions as we address this. So with that, I can turn it back to Dr. Cole.
Thank you so much, Joel. That was quite a bit of information. I'm sure a lot for our community to digest. And so this town hall will be available on the COVID-19 page following to dig a little bit deeper into the information that Joel has shared with us. Now it's my pleasure to have our provost, Dr. Kimo Ayun, talk about our academic work.
Thanks, Xavier. First, if we can go to the next slide, I've got to thank everyone, students, faculty, and staff. When we think about what COVID has done in our world, it has shaken us. It's impacted all of us, and some more than others, some differently, but at the end of the day, it's impacted all of us. We think about our friends and family who have been infected and what they've had to go through with that. We think about our friends and family who have had their employment impacted. For those of us who have children, managing school from a distance at the same time trying to do our work as well. And some of those, they're doing it in different ways. So your child might be fully online or might be partially online, and so we're shuttling them back and forth some days, but not others. And the pandemic has separated us from our family and friends. And so when we had other times to be able to recharge, we don't have those opportunities. But our faculty, staff, and students for the last 6 months have really helped out and helped us to be able to get through this. I thank the students for being flexible in how we're teaching them. I thank the faculty for working on making sure we can ensure the best educational opportunity, and for our staff for being every day there to be able to assist us. Just today, I had the opportunity to look at the survey data from faculty that John Sue alluded to earlier. And we know what's happening with faculty and staff. We know that you're feeling isolated from your peers, your colleagues, because we're not able to gather. We're not able to be in person. We also know from the same survey that people are feeling their mental and emotional health is being challenged. And we also know that part of that strain comes from having to teach in different ways. And at the same time, we look at what's happening in Cobein and Schrader, and we've asked, how do we accommodate our students? And that's where our faculty have really stepped up to be able to do it. And we hear such incredible stories when we think about what the difference at Marquette is. We hear about our faculty reaching out to our students in Schrader and asking them whether or not they can buy supplies for them if they need them, or having support groups to make sure they have someone to talk to. It's very clear that we have asked you to do more, and you've stepped up to that challenge. It's important to see what are the really good things happening in the academic enterprise. If we go to the next slide, we can think about what the Center Teaching and Learning has done in order to make sure that we're aligned for success. They have 60 professional development opportunities, 900 people attending them, 1,000 one-on-one consultations. These are the things that make the difference. These are the things that allow us to be able to live out our mission. This is the way we reach our students. And then when I think about this and I start hearing from faculty, I hear it over and over, the types of things that people are doing to try to get a sense of normalcy. So on the next slide, that's just one example. In my last coffee chat, and I would encourage all of you to come to my coffee chat, Laura Reinholtz was sharing a story with me about how she's been able to create a normal set of teaching around her house. So for her Finance 3001 class, she set up a whiteboard and a tripod and her all of her computer to be able to do it. And if you look on the right-hand side of the slide there, she also has stand-in students, SpongeBob SquarePants, right in the T. So we know that he is a good student and will do well in that class. But these are the types of things that our faculty are doing. And I know I hear stories over and over, and I can show more pictures about how we are adapting. Now, there's one thing to think about how we adapt within the classroom, but we're also thinking about how we adapt, how we teach every day. And a good example of this, if we go to the next slide, is what the English department is doing or has done. In their Foundations in Rhetoric class, they asked the question, how do we offer our students the tools for evaluating racism and racialized violence? They understand that there was a challenge they needed to pursue. So the first thing they considered was what resources did they have available to them? So they reached out to faculty who could help them. Dr. Cedric Burrows and Dr. Lily Campbell helped them to create new units to be able to embed in these classes. But it just wasn't about creating the units and putting them out. They needed to understand the students' perspective. So they also asked the Black Student Committee to come in and share their stories so all of the faculty would better understand what they were going through. And then after sharing the stories, they asked them to look at the module and the curriculum and how could they improve it. And then they launched it. About a week ago, I was able to see the outcomes from that. It was incredible of the response, not only being able to help out the faculty, but be able to help out the students as well. Next slide, please. But even at the time, we know that these are incredible things that are happening. We have to be reflective. We have to think what is in front of us. And Joel has begun to kind of paint that picture, and I've tried to go around the university to be able to talk about it as well. We talk about being transparent. We talk about not sugarcoating. This is our reality. We understand in the near and very future that we're going to have to say goodbye to some of our colleagues. It's not easy. These are some people who are our friends. These are people who've committed their life to Marquette. They've committed it to our students. There is no doubt this will hurt, and we will feel it. But unfortunately, we also know it's something that's going to be painful, but we're going to have to get through it. We have no other choice. And Marquette has had to do this before. You look through Marquette's history, what we're doing, that's not the first time Marquette has done it. But we believe we have the team, and we believe that we have the people who can help us to get through this in the right way. When we get to the other side, I'm confident we will build an even stronger Marquette. It's going to be a Marquette that more students want to come to, that more staff want to work at, that more faculty want to be here, because we've done it in a way that included everyone, but also made it stronger. Next slide. So where I sit from kind of 30,000 feet, I can begin to kind of talk about how we ended up in this situation. So I picked the last 10 years with a middle point. And one of the things that we can do is we can begin to look at enrollment, which as you could talk about is our income. And then we could talk about faculty and staff and academic affairs, which is our expenditures. Over the last decade, enrollment has increased by 2%, but at the same time, increase in faculty staff has been by 9%. So you might ask, well, how did that happen? It's because we looked out and we saw great opportunities. There were departments who stepped forward and colleges who stepped forward and said, if we invest in, for example, our PA program, that would bring more money to the university. If we invested in our computer science program, if we invested in our nursing college, if we invested in occupational therapy, these were all really great ideas. And we invested and enrollment grew. But at the same time, we didn't do a self-analysis. We didn't reflect and ask the question, what do we need to reduce at the same time? So what are the areas in which we didn't have those same levels of growth? And that's beginning to catch up on us. So over 10 years, you see a 2% increase in enrollment, but a 9% increase in faculty and staff. If we convert that to dollars, that's over $10 million. That's one of the reasons why we find ourselves in this. And that's, Marquette has to own up to it. That is something we've done. Next slide. As I begin thinking about what the future is, and you could talk about whether or not we should look out too far into the future, and I get that. But I do know is I need to listen to my enrollment experts. Our enrollment experts are saying is the ability to be able to get additional students in the near future is more challenging. And I saw one of the questions in the comment about, we're seeing record increases at other universities' enrollments. And I can't speak to every university, but we know behind the scenes, some universities do that by giving deep discounts, which means they get fewer dollars to be able to teach the students. That is not a sustainable model. If you cut your prices too much, then you still have to cut expenses. And so we have to look at it case by case. But at least in the near future, we believe that there is going to be a reduction, and we continue to look at our enrollment experts. But I will tell you is even in light of that, we're not standing still. In fact, we're doing everything we can to be able to improve enrollment. Next slide. One of the things that managing enrollment has been conducting in-person campus tours. We were one of the first universities to restart those tours because we know that's our sweet spot. We know if we can get students, they're more likely to come to Marquette if we can tell them our story in face-to-face. But we understand that's not for everyone. So we also have virtual open house tours, which we began immediately when we closed down the university. But we also have to find what are new prospective students. And so they're also generating that. So we are always looking at what is the class for next year. We're going to do everything we can to increase the number of students, but we also need to be realistic at the same time. We need to make sure that the students are there. And that's one of the things we'll continue to do is develop really great programs. I'd like to highlight a few things that we've done. Next slide. We know if we increase our transfer population, that's one of the ways that we might be able to help our enrollment numbers. So in the spring semester, we started and launched a program with Herzing University. It's called Marquette Horizons at Herzing. And these are students who are really good students. We believe that they can make it at Marquette, but they just need to demonstrate a little bit more before we are ready to fully admit them into Marquette. So there are a handful of students who are in this program. They are Herzing students, but they're taught by Marquette and Herzing faculty. And these students, after 1 year, are guaranteed admission as a transfer to Marquette if they hit minimum GPA benchmarks. We're hoping this program continues. That way, all of those students, or those that we think are qualified, that we don't initially admit, what is the alternative pathway to show them how to get to Marquette? Next slide, please. But we also know that there's a way to increase high demand online programs. The College of Nursing has provided us a template. They have a successful Orbis partnership with an outside vendor, which brought about additional 400 students, 400 undergraduate students. And this is where we gave the money. They showed us this model could work. And seeing that that model can work now, we're looking at other additional opportunities. We are right now in the process of signing an agreement to be able to work with another partner where we will share the profit, where they will go and market and find students for our master's in management, for our MBA program, for our master's in clinical mental health counseling. And our target is 400 students by 2025. So we're doing it, but the students just aren't here right now. We'll get there. And that's what I've always said is as people know and think about programs, come to us. We can build it if we know that there's demand for it. But we're not just thinking about online programs. We also have to think about our face-to-face programs. Next slide, please. The College of Nursing has got great potential. We know right now that their demand exceeds their capacity. There are more students who want here come from nursing than we have the ability to serve. And we also know that this expansion will be good for Marquette. What we know about our incoming nursing students is that they are high quality students. They tend not to drop out. They continue with the program. Their retention is high. They graduate in a timely manner, that they have high placement rates, that they serve the mission of Marquette. These are all the incredible things that they can bring. But we also realize that expanding them comes at a cost. If we expand them, and we are working on a plan right now to expand them, it will require additional space. It will require additional faculty. It will require us to make sure that we put everything that they need in order to be successful. And this model right now is they have 150 students, but we'll go to 200 students in 22, 250 students in 26, and so that will suddenly go from 600 nursing students to 1,000 in the undergraduate space. And if it warrants further consideration, if the conditions and staffing warrants it, we'll build additional space and get even more nursing students. We are constantly looking at how to be better. Next slide. But we know even with growth opportunities on the horizon, we are not going to fully realize enrollment. We will continue to see a drop. At least in the near term, we know that there are some financial challenges. Next slide. Our mission statement gives us the pathway. We want to serve our students. That is what we're dedicated to. We want to contribute to the advancement of knowledge, and we want to do this to the benefit of the entire community. Next slide. So when we are thinking about that, we have a model to be able to do that. We look at short and long-term situation, and we want to get campus input, and the way we do that can be seen on the next slide. So for the next slide, we have a working group, a steering committee, deans and vice provosts. I've been having the group meet since the spring to set up the conditions by which we can make sure we move forward in an appropriate way. Next slide. We have campus input, and we developed a process between the deans and the executive committee of Senate that's been approved. We're going to manage short and long term with some committees, and we're going to tie in with beyond boundaries. Next slide. We know there's some parameters. We preliminarily are looking at how to do this. We know for academic affairs, as we're thinking about it, there's 3 years we're going to need to do planning. We have short and long-term working groups, and they'll be assigned targets. Next slide. And we see that through looking at these 6 groups. We're thinking about groups of teaching, program review, college structure, discretionary. In addition to that, research and what our student body would look like. We have to do this in a way that all of those things are combined. Our short-term decisions need to make sure they support where we want to go in the long term. So we might put some temporary actions in place, and then we'll have to line them up with our long-term solutions. Next slide. We have work group leaders, and those 6 buckets that I talked about, you can see here. We're pairing co-chaired with faculty senate leaders and administrators as well. And so we've worked with faculty senate to identify all of these people. Next slide. You'll see we're going to expand that out. We have the example of a teaching group. There will be many, many people across all areas of the university that will be participating. Next slide. And we'll make these decisions that the work groups are going to vet and make recommendation. They'll roll them up to me as provost. I'll review them, and I'll go through them with the dean's input as well. And then the executive leadership will have to sit and make final decisions. Now I want to end with an additional recognition, and let's skip to the next 2 slides. You know, we're great teachers, but we also have great research going at the university. We have Dr. Sandra Hunter, Dr. Chris Sundberg of Health Sciences, and Dr. Robert Fitz, an emeritus in Arts and Sciences, who received a $3 million R01 NIH grant. They're going to address study on power and muscle, power and stamina amongst the elderly. This is the type of research that makes the difference. Final slide, please. But we also know it's done in areas as well. So we have Dr. Liz Angeli from the English department, the College of Arts and Sciences. Her book won an award. It was the best book in technical and scientific communication from the Conference on College Composition and Communication. Her 16-month study looks at emergency workers and how they employ rhetoric to make decisions in unpredictable situations. Great things are happening. But we know we're going to have to be a different Marquette, and we're going to have to be a lean Marquette. So again, I want to thank everybody for all you do, and I will turn it back over to Dr. Cole.
Thank you, Kimo. And I believe that the information that you shared throughout your presentation with you and Joel have been addressing many of the questions that are coming in the chat. I think where I'll lean in the Q&A section are just the big questions that we still have out there that we need to answer, and maybe some clarifications, particularly around governance and where governance fits in. I think you mentioned that on the slides about how that would roll, but I think it'd be worth kind of leaning into that a little bit, as people are saying, you know, not just to be consultative, but truly how do they be part of the process? That's a big one. But I will start with a question by Teresa Wagner from pretty early on. And that's something that we can see how we can piece together on the group here. Teresa asks, what is the likelihood of going all online? And what would the push factors be to move classes all online? And I'll start, and then I can shift to Reverend Dr. John Su, and then we can talk about some of the medical considerations, and I can talk a little bit about how we use our dashboard to make these decisions and how we monitor that. There is a likelihood. I mean, this pandemic, if you think back several months ago, we're hoping that we would be seeing this subside by this point, but in fact, it's rising. Our state has pretty high positive rates right now. Much of the country is experiencing a similar thing, so we've yet to get this under control. So that speaks to that there is a possibility, and I think that Joel mentioned this earlier, that we would need to do that. What are some things that would drive us to that? Well, we look at that dashboard that Kelly Wilmer was going over earlier that talks about positivity rates, but really we look at what's our ability to manage this pandemic. So meaning, how many isolation and quarantine spaces do we have available to us? Are the growth in the number of cases, positive cases we're seeing, outstrip our ability to put people into safe isolation and quarantine? If that outstrips itself, then no, we cannot stay open. We look at critical functions such as teaching, our faculty, our MUPD, our medical clinic, our residence life team, our custodians and maintenance. If we had an outbreak within those groups and they could not report to work to clean, to serve our students, to teach our students in class, then that drives us to a particular decision. But there are many more examples like that, but there is not one thing that will do it. It's a combination of things. And if those things come together, if there's a coalescence of those issues, then yes, we would need to make a different decision about our modality at that point. But know that there are people watching, and not just watching, but working with these factors, physical and personnel, every day to try to make sure we don't get to that breaking point. That's why we have to quarantine buildings to try to stop the spread. It's a very difficult thing to do and a difficult thing to manage, but it is necessary to do that. We still have much work to do with our off-campus populations, to tell you the truth. I love you all, but we all need to be as diligent in front of us as you are away from us. This is just a very simple thing. If we know that these mitigation strategies work because they're working in the classroom, you heard that there's not been transmission in the classroom. That's because what's there? We're all cleaning, we're all wearing our masks, we're all socially distanced. It's very simple. If that can apply to off campus as well as on campus, then we're going to do okay. But that's what it's going to take for us to be able to stay open. So we're asking our community to lean into this and make this very small sacrifice to do the right things. Anything else that our colleagues want to add to that about us going online or remote, or what the pushes might be?
Xavier, this is John Su. I'm happy to add just 3 additional notes if that's helpful to folks. I think 3 just additional points. If, as Xavier said, the classroom transmission situation changes, that would be a reason, for example. Fortunately, so far, we see evidence nationally that does not appear to be the case. Classrooms tend to be among the safer places. Second, we're continuing to observe nationally what happens when other institutions take partial or broad pauses. Does that change? Does that produce benefit to the campus community in the long term? As we get more and more information on that, that may adjust our calculus as well. And then third, throughout the process, we're developing a variety of contingency scenarios. So it's not even the case that we would necessarily have an automatic default switch where all programs might shift, particularly recognizing that a number of our clinical programs, some of our programs have licensure, accreditation requirements. We would in any case attempt to preserve those courses that need those in-person contact hours if we are able to do so. So those are 3 additional factors that will figure into this calculus that you all are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sue. Anyone else with any clarifications to add on the back end of the call?
Xavier, I'd just like to speak up to say, obviously, I've made countless pleas since early spring about doing what's right, even though it feels like a sacrifice and separating yourself and looking for smaller groups and wearing your masks. I think what could move us to needing to move to remote is if we have to continue to quarantine residence halls and we find ourselves without a dining hall where students can go to eat, or we find ourselves without staff who are able to maintain the kind of long work hours that we've been doing. I think, again, I will continue to make this plea: do what is right, not what is comfortable, not what you've done before. Help us get through this challenging year, and maybe we'll be home free as we move into future years.
And Mary, that actually shifts into a question that we had on the back end that's pretty technical, but it's just good to know how the systems work to feed our students in isolation and quarantine, and what happens if we have a hall that doesn't have a dining hall that needs to be quarantined. And so I actually wanted to call on the talents of Rick Arcuri, who is lurking in the back end. Rick, can you talk a little bit about how we've been feeding our students in quarantine and isolation?
Sure, Xavier. It worked out for us in the first 2 instances where we had a dining room in those buildings. So Schrader and Cobein, it was natural to close that off to the students that live in those buildings and to manage it that way. We have buildings that don't have dining rooms where students already walk to other areas for their meals. So, in the instance where we closed Cobein and the folks from Carpenter and Straz had to walk a little further, that's normal for people who live in Mashuda and O'Donnell and Humphrey. Where it becomes more challenging for us in the future is if we lose, for instance, the Commons, and we're looking for a method to roll other buildings through that or to commissary out of that space so that we can deliver meals if we needed to do a full building that did not have a dining room. So there are a number of different options open for us, and we're exploring all of those and getting the staff in place to be ready in the event that we would need to do anything beyond what we've already done.
Thank you so much, Rick. And just so you know, our partners in Sodexo, this is also, it's been a lot of the Res Life staff and Rick Arcuri staff, but this has also been fueled by volunteers. Student Affairs put out a call for volunteers to help out with quarantine calls, delivering meals, you name it, entertaining our students while in quarantine. And I'll tell you, it is just the best of what this community is, that we've all come together to support our students who were in the situation by necessarily no fault of their own. I just, while we ask for and plead for different behaviors to happen, we know that we are fighting a 100-year pandemic. It is a formidable opponent, but we will continue to fight as long as we can. And I think, again, if we all lean into the simple things that we're being asked to do, I think that we can manage this very well. We only have a couple of minutes left, and I know that there are a lot of questions, most of them around timeline for decisions on workforce reductions. And of course, that's concerning information when we hear that. I think you've heard Joel and others talk about in general that there are work stream groups that are coming together now to try to map out timelines and targets. There have also been questions about, will this just be about faculty or will this be about administration and upper administration? Clearly, this is about, not clearly, but clearly it's not clearly, but it is about the entire university at whole, upper administration, and faculty. We're looking at all of these areas to figure out where might we right size in order to deal with the enrollment that we have and the demand for the programs that we have. These are not easy decisions, and we know that there are lots of concerns, but know that these conversations will continue over the next several months to keep us all in the conversations around this. we're down to our last couple of minutes, and I wanted to take an opportunity to thank this community for participating in this town hall. We know that we haven't gotten to every question. There were a lot of private answers in the chat that were given. We will certainly be transferring a lot of those answers to the COVID-19 Q&A page, so please check back there in the next 24 to 48 hours. I'd like to close in our tradition of a prayer. And this is one that many of you, I'm sure, have heard before. It's attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, founder of the Franciscans, also a fine order of priests. If we'll quiet ourselves, please. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen to that. I'll end with saying, community, let us continue to hold each other close, provide support for each other, and give us all the grace that we need to manage through this very difficult process. Mingus, my dog, is also saying goodbye. And with that, we'll sign off for this town hall. God bless you, Marquette community. Thank you.